very excited for this speaker, Dezjorn Gauthier. As CEO of Dezjorn International, Dezjorn Gauthier's work focuses on empowering trans men of color through education, empowerment, and inspiration. For this interactive talk, Dezjorn discusses how we can forge families that work for us through hope, understanding, and creating visible pathways to support the trans and gender diverse people in our lives. PowerToFly's account executive, Lex Keaton, will join Dezjorn. So please help me welcome Dezjorn Gauthier and Lex Keaton.
Hello. Well, Dezjorn, thank you so much for joining us today. I know here at PowerToFly, we're excited to have you. But first, would love to just kind of hear from you. What would you like to tell the audience about yourself and Dezjorn International?
Yes, thank you. And thank you all for being here. Happy Pride, of course. A big deal, right? I'm super excited and I'm glad to be sharing it with you all today. So yes, I'm Dezjorn, CEO of Dezjorn International, also the executive director of Dezjorn International Foundation, Inc. So we do have a nonprofit wing as well. It kind of gets clumped all together, you know, sometimes, but for sure. And the reason for that is because I own a conglomerate firm. Which means I have a whole bunch of multiple subsidiaries. And the way they were created actually is I'm a guy of many hats. And so I started out as a professional model way back when I was like 9 months old, which we may even touch on a little bit more as we go through this dialogue. My mother started me in that, and I've kind of been an advocate and a public speaker since then. And when I transitioned, I kind of by default fell into advocacy work, right, in that area. And as we went along, I started seeing that there were like gaps. There were things that needed to be filled for my community. And so I started finding ways that I could create space for my community members, for my brothers and my sisters, for my siblings. And what I did was I started creating different brands, and each one just slowly started to build. I've had folks even kind of tell me sometimes I'm like the trans Amazon, you know, because I have so many different things that are going on. And then here we are today. As you fast forward, we started out in 2014 under a different name. And then here we are now in 2021. I have, I think, 7 or 8 subsidiaries. I can't even remember. We're getting new ones every so often, in multiple industries, from magazines all the way over to construction. So literally, it's like a whole different world of different things going on over here.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it sounds like, and I would love to kind of hear more about what resources you provide trans men of color. You know, you were talking about all the different entities that you've created. You know, I would love to hear a little bit more about those resources.
Yes. So through my foundation, the reason why the foundation was created was as I was doing things in the community, as I would do speaking gigs or whatever it was, I would always take a percentage of what I was doing, and I wanted to make sure I gave it back into the community. That's just how I was raised. And so I created this nonprofit. And then again, I wanted to focus on Black trans men, trans folks in general, as we have come to now today. And so we started out with something really simple called Binder Brothers. And Binder Brothers was just binders. So what we would use, you know, for our chest, to just help with dysphoria of the chest. And so I started out just collecting different binders from other men that have transitioned, or just other people that have transitioned, either used for medically or in their everyday life. There's different type of binders that can be used. And so we started collecting those as people were done with them, because you're like, well, what do I need them for? And then we would end up folks that were either low income or just didn't know where to go to get them. And safe binding is very important, especially back a few years. We didn't have as many options. Now people have got very creative and technology has advanced. And so there's multiple different brands of safe binding. So that's just one thing. And then it grew into working with housing, working with internships, making sure our folks had internships. We end up partnering with other places, like trans tech, social enterprises with Angelica Ross, and we end up getting into the tech company, and things like that. And so we had multiple different streams. And as I was opening these different brands, right, I would find other folks I could partner with to be able, on a nonprofit side, get community members to either gain experience or be able to utilize that resource. Like I said, for example, housing, we were able to partner with people, get some people with first month security, things like that, to move in or out of a bad housing situation at times too. We've had that happen. So we've had that. Legal services as well. We know with name changes, IDs, all of that stuff. And we know the laws and the policies change from state to state. And so we were able to connect even with different attorneys, different law firms, to be able to assist with that in multiple states as well. So again, multiple resources out there I've been able to connect with to just try to stream. And it doesn't matter if it's one person or if it's 100. We always look, when anything comes through our inbox asking for assistance or help, we try to find a way to be able to give that person the assistance that they need.
Yeah. And, when you are having these conversations and you're recognizing and identifying these needs, are these needs, on a personal level, is this stuff that you've also experienced, that you have also been able to recognize, like, oh, I experienced this on a personal level, but this is also something that the community at large experienced?
Yes. And that's a really good point. Thank you. A lot of them were. And if I hadn't experienced it at the time, now, as the company has grown, as you can see, I've experienced it along the lines. And so I would see how important it was. And I'm glad that I either created something, earlier on, and then I learned, and experienced it. But one of the examples is we have Black Tea Magazine, for example, which is one of the world's first Black transgender magazines. And I created that because the lack of representation. So I myself was experiencing not being able to see someone that looked like me in a major brand or anything, across the board. And so we created that. My name change, for example, I went to law school, so I kind of knew the ins and outs to be able to do, but I said, everybody doesn't go to law school. And this was such a hassle to do. How can we make this easier? There's got to be someone out here that also is looking to do the same thing. And so I took myself back, being in like third grade, when your teacher says, you're probably not the only person with that question, right? And so I thought about that and I said, you're right. I probably am not. And I would connect with folks on that. So yes, indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going to, not necessarily switching, but a little pivot to America in Transition, A Family Matter, your short series. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that, when we're talking about personal experiences. You mentioned your relationship with your mom and your transition on becoming a man. Would you mind kind of elaborating a little bit more on the audience to kind of have a better understanding of what that looks like for you?
Sure, of course. Yeah. So like I stated earlier, my mother got me involved in modeling. And it's funny because as we were filming the docuseries, we had a whole different kind of angle that we were going for. The director and producer, Andre Perez, kind of had this whole different thing. I was out doing things with Barney's New York. I was in major mainstream media modeling. And so, of course, Andre's like, hey, how can we film this? What can we do? And then in the midst of that, I was having top surgery and my mother was also being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So out of nowhere, we just kind of took a 360. And so I started off with my mom modeling, and we use that as a way for us to communicate. It became a language. My mother understood advocacy work. She understood the fashion industry, speaking, all of that. She understood that. And I said, how can I use that? So in the film, we're talking about how I use that to discuss with my mother what I was doing in, as far as transitioning, because my mother never knew. She definitely knew I fell under the rainbow. I would put that out there. She knew that part. She would kind of want to deny it. She's a hardcore Christian, things of that nature. So of course, religion played a role. I'm a confirmed Catholic man as well, and that played a role. And I speak a very little because that can be its own topic, but I do touch on that in the film as well. And as we went along, and we were filming, like I said, she was getting sicker and sicker by the day. And then we started to have to use, cancer as a way to communicate. We had to connect before. We did not have time left. Time was not on our side. And so we used that. And Andre did a great job being able to capture that. And I learned things from my mother that I didn't know that she was hurt about, that she was hurt that I never told her that I was trans. I told her that I was hurt, just thinking if I said anything to her that she would never accept me, because little small things or little small gestures that she would do, things she would say, or when I would kind of try to come out of the closet, the pushback or the negativity that I got. But she started to see, and you can really see it in the film, and I wish we would have had more time, but you would start to see that she saw the advocacy work, because she did things with like the NAACP. Had she been alive during the whole movement with Black Lives Matter, she would have been very involved with that. And she saw that the equality for the communities is what really truly mattered. And because she could relate on that level, we were now able to communicate because I found a language that she understood. So I use that in the film. And every time I do workshops or go around, and I tell parents, you have to connect with your child on a level that they will understand. And the same thing for my teenagers and my youth that are out there that are trying to find a way to communicate with their parent. What other ways do you connect? What ways do you really find so touching that you're like, I will always remember this memory with my mom, my dad, my grandma, whoever it is that you're trying to voice that to? And so American Transition does a good job of trying to capture that we had. My mother and I did not have a great relationship. Like I said, if it came down to advocacy work, doing things with the fashion industry, we were A1, we're on point. But as far as, if I asked my mom to go to the movies or something like that, I never did that. I didn't just kind of like hang out with my mom. I always would hang out with my dad. And so literally I would say the last, 4 years of her life, were probably the best years, because we actually were able to connect, and she got to see that she did not make a mistake, because for a very long time, I believe she felt like she had made a mistake because I was trans. And so before she did pass away, she understood that. And again, the film does a great job of capturing that and seeing that she was happy with who I was and grew up to be.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I encourage everyone to go watch. And, it really is a beautiful story. And I think one of the things that I love that you touch on is when we think about intersectionality and what that means, there are multiple ways to be able to connect with people and be able to find, be able to identify where people are in the path forward. So I really appreciate you, touching on that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Well, Dezjorn, while we're here is also to talk about what you're doing now, but kind of going from what your personal experiences, what you're doing now, what resources during, your growing up period and transitioning, like what did you utilize? Like you have obviously are providing resources for everyone. So I'm curious to learn, what were you able to utilize during that time?
Yes. And it is totally different nowadays. And I look back at it like, wow, I started transitioning, just for all of you that are watching, 2014. As far as physically, now way beforehand, I knew when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And so what I used, is completely different from just a couple of like weeks ago, right? Like what people can do. We didn't have TikTok. We didn't have all of that, everyone is out, putting and displaying what trans folks do. And so what I had was Google. Okay. I had Google. And honestly, I had Google, like that really is my answer. I used YouTube as well. That was a huge thing because again, being in the teaching field and everything, we know everything on Google is not always true, right? So I needed to really get down and be like, all right. And again, YouTube isn't always true either, but at least you got a visual of like what someone is saying. And then what I did was I took that information and I would go back to, my doctors, or I'd find a term. So for example, like endocrinologists. I had no idea what that was. I didn't even know that it was important that I should have one to deal with my hormone replacement therapy, my HRT. And so once I had got that keyword, I then would take that, Google it, see what it meant. Okay, that's a doctor. That's somebody I should probably have on my team. I'd go back to my primary. Hey, I need an endocrinologist. And they're like, well, what do you don't have like diabetes or anything? Like, what do you need? And then I would start explaining what's going on. They're like, oh yeah, that's great. Not saying that your physician can't. So let me put that disclaimer out there. Depending, folks are experienced and trained in multiple areas. However, the route that I went, everyone's journey is kind of different, but I did have an endocrinologist. And so things like that. So I really utilized that. But there's also a second aspect of things that I did. We had Facebook, right? We had MySpace. We had those type of things before all the other social media things that were out here. And I really utilized the Facebook groups at the time before now where there's like 1,000,001 people in there and you have no idea how you're communicating before all that. So I started in a group called Black Trans Men Inc. And they're still in existence today. They're one of the few all Black trans organizations nationwide that are giving out assistance as well. And I was in a small group. There was maybe at the time, there was probably like 100, maybe 150, maybe. And to me, I was like, okay, that's like all the trans men in the world, like right there. Like we're all in this one group. And we connected. We were able to connect because not only did we connect on being Black, we connected on being trans. We also connected on the fact that there were elders and then there were young people. I was one of the younger ones at the time. Now I have more youth that are in that group. And I work with them on a whole different level now, again, being partnered more on a business standpoint, but I utilize those as well. And again, at the time we were able to build strong relationships. A lot of those folks I talk to today, one of which I call my uncle now, because truly he has fallen into that place of being an uncle I never actually had. And I was able to even ask my elders, even before I had surgeries, I was able to ask, how did that work out for you after surgery? What do I need for post-op? And they would also be able to tell me their experiences and the do's and don'ts, right, of certain things, that they had even, from back in the 70s or 80s and how things have changed. And they also learned from me as well, so that they could pass that information on, something that may have been updated that they didn't have access to, back in maybe the 80s.
Yeah, no. And I mean, family is family, community is community. And, I think that's incredible. And you're right, community has been around for a long time. So it's awesome to see that multi-generations are able to benefit. So during that time, how are you able to kind of mentally maintain, if you don't mind me kind of getting more personal, like on a mental level, though, like that's a lot for anyone to kind of navigate. But as you mentioned, it is different for Black trans men. So just out of curiosity, like how are you mentally able to navigate through that?
Yes, 100%. And that is a very important question. And folks really do need to know. I had to really focus and zone in on self-care. I have a lot of support. I also am very privileged in having that. And I recognize that immediately. Again, like the Facebook groups and things like that I was involved in, as I would talk to people, I realized, I had my dad, I had a parent that was supportive, that was willing to, pay for a doctor's appointment or an HRT, whatever, may have been needed so that I was authentically myself. I had friends in high school that were supportive. I have friends still today from back when I was in elementary that came back and said, oh, I'm so glad. I knew that's probably what it was. I just didn't know what it was called. I seen it way back in, 1995 or whatever you want to put it. And I was like, wow. And I have that, and not everyone does. But there are times that I do feel alone, even as a public figure. And I had to channel in and know, what do I need to do to make sure that I can still survive and have others still be able to survive as well? And I needed to know, you gotta have your therapist on board, regardless if you feel that mentally you're okay. And this is anybody. I don't care if you identify as trans or not. Have a mental health professional that is on your medical team that's ready, even if you don't utilize them, but you know who you can call, even if that is maybe a hotline number that you can just call to vent to and someone can walk it through for you. I then also started pinpointing what kind of makes me happy. What are my happy moments? And I started using that for self-care. I love coloring. Adult coloring books were like the best thing when all of a sudden they kind of just came back out again. I'm like, great, wonderful. It's not just for 3-year-olds. I've been trying to tell people this for years. And I use that because I'm able to color. I'm terrible. Don't ask me to draw anything else, by the way. I need lines. I'm just going to put that out there. I use that. I then started realizing too, being with community mattered, because part of it was, although I do have a supportive system, they can't identify any of the experiences that I'm going through. Yeah. Not only are they not me, but they also don't identify as trans. The difficulty I also had with my dad is Caucasian. So he couldn't identify with some of the Black experiences as well that I had. He couldn't understand his white privilege. Sometimes he still does not understand his white privilege. And with that being said, I felt better when I would be in community. And so I found conferences that I could go to that are across the nation, across the world, that I could travel to. And, if they're across the world, I'm learning about that culture as well and how being trans differs in different cultures as well. And that helped me. But the self-care is what was really important. Knowing numbers of who I needed to call was very important. My wife knows who to call if for some reason I start to seem different, or whatever it is. So my support systems also know who they need to call or reach out to if for some reason I'm starting to kind of seem a little depressed or down, or something in the community happens that's affecting our whole community as a whole. So even that, for us from a psychological standpoint as well, you do have to know. And parents or friends, allies, reach out, ask them, hey, how are you feeling today? I've noticed this or that, and reaching out, just having someone reach out also really truly can make a difference in the world. Sending a smiley face to them can make a difference, because it's showing that someone cares, someone sees you. And that was what I was looking for, that sometimes I was missing. I was in a public eye, but I wasn't receiving, a smiley face from, my neighbor or a good friend of mine. And it's the small things like that that really, truly do matter and can keep someone alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I just want to echo, you mentioned, taking care of yourself, self-care is kind of a long game. It doesn't end, it continues. And yes. The fact that you still have to practice this stuff today is really the key to that success, and very crucial. So again, just wanted to highlight that, because it is very true, and really to the community at large. And you kind of even mentioned that, like, there's things that can happen to the community that can affect. So yeah, it truly is a long game. So with that being said, when we're talking about community, what are some of the advice you would give some of the audience that's tuning in today? If they're going through a similar experience, what's some advice that you might give?
Yeah, so right off the bat, I always want to tell people, always be you. Always be you. There's the disclaimer of that too, making sure that it is safe, making sure your safety is always a priority, but always be you. And allies, like I mentioned before, and even if you're not an ally and you identify, right along in the same community, along the same umbrella, listen. Let others tell their story. I say this again, even as a public figure, everyone kind of assumes, I'm the Black trans man, right? And I said, no, absolutely not. My experience is completely different from the others. I'm more than happy to voice some of the things that they have told me as well, but everyone has a different story. Everyone transitions completely different. And again, if you are thinking about transitioning or you're going through transition, it is okay that your transition is different from your friends or the friend on the other side of the screen. It happens. It's not going to go the same way, right? Or we would all be duplicates of each other, right? So knowing that it is okay, know that there are people out there that are willing to support, that are willing to help. You might have to dig for us, but no, we are trying to get out there on the mainstreams so that you know where we are. And again, allies, you're already in the door. Help us get there so that the representation is there, so our youth don't have to dig deep or scroll hours on Google trying to find an answer that may not be correct for them. And there is an actual correct licensed answer for them to be able to do, and they can be safe at the same time. So that's pretty much my advice. You know, we are here, we've been around forever, and always be you.
Yeah, and I would second that. And to even kind of piggyback off of your answer, you mentioned, allies already kind of have their foot in the, they are the people who can open the door and make that more accessible for the, LGBTQIA community.
Exactly.
And so what advice would you give to folks who are supporting others going transitioning? So if, either it's family or friends or just an ally, like what are some things that you would, and you've kind of already mentioned that, but what are some things you kind of circle back and highlight for them to do to support someone transitioning?
Yes. So those of you that are supporting, like I said, continue to always listen, continue to let them know that you're supporting. And I'll be very specific on what I mean by that. I don't mean every single morning, shoot us a text message. Okay. It's like, don't overdo it. What I mean is if you see that maybe they're asking for a donation for, a nonprofit organization that does huge work in the community, and they may have utilized some of the resources that that organization does. Go ahead and donate, even if it's just $1. Go ahead and reshare that. Don't be afraid to publicly show the support, because the other thing is, hey, I know when I'm at home, you're supporting me. I know when we're at Christmas dinner, you're supporting me. But what happens when you're out in public and I'm not standing right there by you? Are you still actually being supportive? That's what we're looking for. So again, if it's a safe space for you and you have your foot in the door and you feel grounded in those ways, please utilize that as well. Being able to publicly stand for us when we are not always present. That is another space that we would love to have more support in, anytime, anywhere. And if you can't, find a trans person that can bring us in. We're more than happy to do workshops and trainings, because we're beyond experience. Our community does so much. You would be, mind blown on some of the things that people do, and they haven't even come out as trans yet to the public, but they are. We're so talented. And so again, if you can't find us, we're out there as well.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of helped me lead to the last question I have for you. How do we support you in your business other than utilizing your businesses?
Exactly. Yeah. So again, you can go right to the website, www.dezjorn.com. That has everything of the conglomerates listed there. You can utilize the actual services. Or if you have folks that that have been looking for that, or even something as simple as you just don't know the answer to that question and you don't want to give the wrong answer because you don't identify with us as a community member, then go ahead and shoot it into an inbox. You can find me on Facebook. I'm pretty much on every platform, and I do respond back to try to help, like I said, in any way possible. If you want to donate for a nonprofit organization, you can go to the diffinc.org or just type in Dezjorn International Foundation. Like I said, if you put my name in, because it's so unique, I pretty much pop up either way, and you can donate there. We put it back in, and we'll do it into specific areas too. So if you want it directly for our youth, one of our educational programs, we'll have that money go straight to that. And if you want it, maybe for trans women, we'll have it go directly for that as well. So we can do specifics.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dezjorn. Really appreciate you, leaving it out on the table today and for the audience. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dezjorn. Thank you, Lex. Follow Dezjorn on all of the social platforms. I just did on 2 of them, Instagram and Facebook. And incredible resources, incredible conversation. Thank you both so very much.